exactly.
So I do want to get to the books today. I want to talk about, first of all, I'm gonna just throw out my little story. When I was looking for a narrator for the books, I went through about 250 voices.
Yeah.
And I was looking and I was looking, and then I heard your voice, right? Because you were out there. I think you were just starting narration at the time, and you
Yeah.
were out there on the site, and I heard your voice, and I was like, that's the one, right? And I reached out to you and you didn't respond immediately, and I kept going, and I was almost with somebody else. Then I was like, then you respond, I dropped them and immediately came back. I was like, okay, you responded, yay. And then you did that little demo for me, that little 3-minute demo, and
Yeah.
I listened to it, and I was just, I was like, that's just the perfect voice. This is the voice for the series. And I remember listening to it and calling my son in and making him listen to it. And I said, okay, what's your first reaction? He says, I want to hear more.
Yeah.
And that was I was like, that's exactly right. I want to
Yeah.
hear more. And so that was my first contact with you. And
Yeah.
it was just like your voice was made for this series, because I've got angels and fallen angels and devils and dragons and all the, and you got to have a larger than life voice, but you got the melodic part of it that's from all of the singing, from all the years of singing, that's
Right.
just there. And so it was, to me, it was the perfect voice from day one. So
I thought it was so much fun to, I don't know, anything I've ever narrated, and you're right. I was really starting off. I would probably be embarrassed to listen to it now because I haven't heard the original. I know that you put it in the file, and I can't bring myself to
I
listen.
have it saved. I'll put it out there for everybody someday. So
But yeah, I think getting into, I mean, like the first time Direct the Dragon showed up, and I was like, oh my God, I'm having so much fun with this. That's, or the first time Smoke showed up, and I had to give so much thought to giving the idea, because there's a debate among narrators. I think you and I have probably talked about this, of whether you should try and do the accents, from the different characters and stuff. And the majority of narrators will say, don't attempt it. It doesn't come across well. And I just made a creative choice really early on that I'm going to use accents. And if I don't do it well, I'll develop it and make sure that I do it well. And so yours was the first opportunity that I had where I was like, all right, here's 27 different types of characters from all different planets around the universe. What do they sound like? And I think that was one of the most fun parts of doing that.
yeah, what do you have? You like 50 different accents that you do now? So
Yeah,
you've
yeah, I'm up to
developed
like
over the
30.
last few years, haven't you? So,
Yeah, I've had to do a bunch. I've had to do a bunch, and Smoke was the one that made me the most nervous, because I wanted to give honor to the the oral affect, or the vocal affect, that you hear from Native Americans, specifically the fact that he's from Old West times. He's a couple hundred years old, and so it would be a very noticeable accent, but at the same time, you don't want to come across as, gosh, I can't think of what the word would even be, but it's kind of
condescending.
it's kind of like when Jerry Lewis did the Asian character in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And, it's like, it was a pejorative. It was almost like a mocking of the Asian accent and affect. And you don't want to do that. Like that would be like my worst nightmares, for somebody to come along and say, oh, you do a really crappy, version of a Native American accent. So I spent a lot of time, especially with the Vikings, because I had to find a voice for the dwarves. And so I spent a long time listening to Norse people and trying to figure out, like, what parts of that, because dwarfs don't exist as far as we know. So I had to figure out what I wanted to sound like. And I was like, well, let's do like an ancient Norse kind of an accent, Icelandic or something. And so there's been a lot of challenge in doing that.
Yeah, and I remember when you came up with the Ishtar's accent and
Oh,
all of the work that you put into. Yeah,
oh my
you had some, and I hadn't even thought of that. Right? You brought that character to life in ways that I was totally unexpected, which has really been, for me, the best. Whenever I get a new recording from you, I know that you're going to come up with these characters, and it's going to be just so much fun to listen to. And
God.
then you did the revised versions, and the revised versions, you nailed the characters even better, right? And so
Practice by now. Yeah. 6 books.
I have one more story I want to
to.
tell on this. So we're giving away the first short story, which is a story about smoke chasing the devil, right? And that's the very first short story we did. It may still be my favorite because of your voice, but I still remember that you've done it. You did it in the third person, or you did it with just a standard narrator's voice with some of Smoke's voice in there, and you just didn't like it, and you threw it away, and you came back and just did the whole thing in Smoke's voice, and so it was all from his point of view, and it worked perfectly. It was just so good.
I forgot we did that. I forgot that I did that twice for that reason. I completely had forgotten we'd done that. Yeah.
No, and I was a little worried because I thought it'd be a little slow because he's 7 foot tall, and he's got this ponderous way about him. And I thought, well, that's going to be a little slow. And then you sent it to me, and within 2 sentences, I'd forgotten all about it being slow because I was so deep into the cadences of it. That cadence, that storied cadence that he had was just so good. And so that short story, if you join in the metaverse, you get that short story. And I think we're streaming it in chapters now. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to do that, but I love that story. I love that story.
Sneak peek giveaway that nobody knows about yet is that you've actually found artwork for Harmon, which I thought was super cool because I've been playing this voice now for a few years, and it was neat to finally see, like, here's what he looks like. So I'm excited for everybody to finally get a chance to see, what the actual character looks like. And now I can actually stick a voice, mine, with this character, and now I can imagine him even better in my mind. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work, but I'd like to give that one away at the end of the treasure hunt as a first ever image of Harmon Waite as an NFT. If you enter the treasure hunt and you win, you get this one of a kind token. So we'll see if that works, and then can I even show the image? I don't know the ins and outs of that, so we'll see how all that goes.
To be determined.
Yeah, there will be more. So so you got into this and you did the narration, which I think is by far the strongest part of the books because it really brings them to life. What has been some of those explorations of the books where, like, was there any particular book or character? Like, to me, the best voice is still the dragon's voice, right? So to me, that was like, I was like, Cumberbatch couldn't have done it any better. And I was all telling everybody and showing them, right? I show, listen to this, right? And so to me, that's still my favorite voice. I've over and above Smoke and everybody. What about you? Is there a favorite voice for you, or a particular situation that you remember?
I've got several of them. The dragon is probably the best example because I had to cognitively evolve him throughout the book series, because when you meet him first, he's this ancient dragon who hasn't had any interaction with anyone for millennia. He's been stuck for thousands of 2,000 years in this place and hasn't had anyone to talk to but himself. And so he's bad at speaking. He's angry all the time. He speaks with the patience of a creature that will live for thousands of years. Like, he is in no hurry to tell you a damn thing, right? And then as he evolves as a character throughout the books and comes into the modern world, when he's released from that hell, and he's now, shapeshifts, and he's able to get in and exist among humans, in an earthly realm, he starts picking up, he watches a lot of movies. He watches Star Wars, and so he picks up all these colloquialisms and all these taglines from movies, and Dirty Harry and all this kind of stuff, and evolving him into where with each step of his evolution, he becomes a little more human in his communication until, toward the end, he speaks like a person almost, Yeah,
except he still doesn't like to tell you much. He's still a little bit obtuse, and he talks to you and you're like trying to figure out what the heck. So.
He definitely prefers one-word answers. So.
Or obtuse. Let me go around the block when I could have gone right straight to you, right? Let me go around the block.
He always has some little quip. So he's a fun character. The other one was doing both voices for the dwarves was interesting because they have such different personalities, and they have
Argrim and Floki.
they had the same accent Gargrim is, the bigger, gruffer, and Floki is just excited all the time. But they needed to have the same accent, but be distinctly different characters. And sometimes they're having conversations with each other or with 3 or 4 other characters and going back and forth in between all of those different voices. That gets confusing in my head. But that was fun, envisioning myself as each one of those characters, because I have a visual idea in my mind of what they look like. And so when Gargrim's speaking, he sounds like Gargrim. When Floki's speaking, he sounds like Floki. So that one was an interesting challenge. And that's one of the harder accents to get into. That one's really hard to get into.
So I have a question for you on that.
Yeah.
Do you record one voice and then come back and record another and put them together, or do you just pause from one character to the next?
I pause. That's a great question. I actually pause my recording. I get into the new character, then I record that character, and then I come back because I still want it to flow. Like, I don't want it to sound like it's piecemeal. When they're having a conversation, I'll say the one thing as the one character, hit pause, switch characters, come back, give the response, switch characters, come back. And so it's a slow process to do it that way, but that's the way that I feel like the conversation feels the most natural at the end when you have multiple characters talking.
Yeah, I never would have guessed, because they're friends, and there is, like you say, quite a bit of back and forth between them as they tease each other, or especially Gargrim teasing Floki, and it just flows beautifully, right?
Yeah.
I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, there's a pause in between everyone, because I have to get into character, and if I ever catch myself slipping character, then I have to go back and redo it, and that happens more often than I'd like to admit. But I'm like, oh damn it, I slipped out of character, so that one.
I don't get to hear that. I don't get to hear that. You do a really good job of editing your own work, and so I think I catch a problem like once every 4 or 5 chapters. You have got a repeated word in there or something. So,
yeah. Oh, I've got a funny one for you. The very first book that I narrated, Wait on the Ripper, I have this process that I use where I use a dog clicker, and whenever I make a mistake, I click it, and then I go back and I can take all of those out, right? And I left one in the very first book that I ever narrated for you. And when I sent it to you for edits, you sent it back and you said, hey, Dan, and mind you, at this point in time, I'd only read one of your books and I thought you were really religious. So yeah, I made a mistake, and I probably made that mistake numerous times, because by the time I left it in there, I clicked it and went, God damn it. And it was still there.
I remember that. Yeah, luckily, I'm as far from religious as you can get, and have been known to cuss myself sometimes. So there you are.
Yeah, I was just freaking mortified. I was like, I can't. Of all the things I could have left in there, me yelling a swear word at myself. Oh God. So anyway,
no, I just thought you're into it. Darn it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I take my job super seriously, clearly.
Yeah, but well, you do a damn good job of it. So that's why you're in demand nowadays. I'm very happy to have you still on this series. I feel kind of blessed to tell the truth. Not that I'm religious, but I do feel kind of blessed.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I have a blast with it. The other one, I'm trying to think, the ones that have been the most interesting, Ishtar. Man, Ishtar is a voyage for me personally, because I am a fairly masculine individual, and a fairly dominant individual. And Ishtar is the picture of feminine sensuality. I mean, she's just sexy in every way, shape, and form, from the way that she looks to the way that she behaves to the control that she has over men. And so I knew that had to come out in her voice. And so, like, to find my own femininity and say, how would I be as a sexy woman? That
had to be a stretch. I didn't even think about that. So yeah, I was just impressed with the accent. But yeah, you did a fantastic job on the voice.
Yeah, no, she's super sexy. Braces is super sexy too. And so, trying to channel my feminine side, and and then trying to make sure that it comes across as a truly feminine voice without mimicking some shitty, high-pitched voice.
Yeah, but they're both goddesses, and so you still had to have power in there, which you did beautifully. And then Ishtar is also, in addition to being the goddess of fertility, she's the goddess of war. And so she has that steely side as well, which you hear in the way that she talks. And I thought you just did a fantastic job with it. Yeah. And hey, for everybody else, these are characters that show up in later books. They're not in Wait on the Ripper, right? Which is what we're focused on in the metaverse. But we do have 3 of the revised books out, which book 2 introduces Drek, right? And then book 3 takes him off to another world to fight Drek a lot more and do other things. And then I think in book 4 is when he meets Boreas.
Yeah.
And then book
I think five is when
Ishtar shows up. So
yeah.
oh, and I talking about voices she redid. The voice of Satan, which is the main antagonist in book 2, is redoing that. You just nailed.
Well, dude, actually,
that was so creepy sounding, man. I was like, that's a creepy Satan.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because actually there was a reason behind the change in his voice from the first time to the second time. It was because when I got to books 5 and 6 and I realized the relationship between Ishtar, Satan, and the Antichrist, I realized that they are of a lineage. And because they're of a lineage, I needed their voices to have some hint of one another, so that they would seem like they knew each other, like they had been related, you know? And so I went back and took Ishtar's voice and her accent, which was ancient Mesopotamian, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Which doesn't exist, so it had to be invented, right? And I had to take that and then find out who is an evil character. And I used Vlad the Impaler, I used Dracula, the old idea of Dracula, from an Eastern European, because I wanted to take the path of evolution, the path of human evolution, from the Fertile Crescent in the Mesopotamian area all the way into Eastern Europe. And so I wanted to introduce with each new character that generationally take that original accent and then bend it into. So that's why Ishtar is the oldest, and she has the oldest accent. Then you have Satan, then you have all of Satan's children, and every one of them has an element of that accent now. So there's a lot of shit that goes on in this head of mine.
No, you are Mensa smart, darn it. So you do come up with a lot of detail in it, and a lot of just the whole background thing. I think we could do an entire series just on the backgrounds that you worked up for these characters.
Well, I mean,
it's why they're so much fun to me, because even as the guy that wrote the thing in the first place, you bring a new dimension to it that I didn't imagine, and that brings things alive for me in ways that they weren't, and they're already alive for me, right? And now they're more alive because your voice is in there.
Well, and one of the things that's interesting is that, you know, all of these characters that you bring up, they have some basis in mythology or religion. And so every time now, like, I didn't realize that was going to be the case when we started this, John. So like now, every time somebody shows up, I get on Wikipedia, and the very first thing I do when there's new characters, I'm like, okay, what do we know about this character? Which people worshipped him? Which people believe in him? You know, what was the personality like? And I just get on Wikipedia and just do a day worth of research for every character now that shows up. So that's where a lot of that comes from.
Just wait till you get to the Lost Gods planet, right? Which is the realm of the Lost Gods, where I have all of the gods from, you know, different mythologies. You're gonna just love that one.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one, man. I'm excited. That's when you told me that that's where you were planning on taking this, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be so much fun.
Well, he has to go there, and of course he has to meet Grandfather, and he has to evolve, because somewhere by the end of all of this, he has to be able to take on a whole army of fallen angels, right? Yeah. And so how do you create a character that will evolve into something like that? And it's been a lot of fun. There is, in anime in particular, there's something called a superpowered character, and the animes go exactly like this. They start out with hardly, with hardly any knowledge or hardly any understanding of their powers, and each episode they just get stronger and stronger. And so I love the superpowered characters, because for me as a writer, it forces me to constantly evolve that character in interesting ways. So it's never, it's not the same character coming back at you in book after book. It is another evolved version of that character, and something has changed. Something has happened with him that gives him more powers, gives him a better understanding, gives him different realizations. And he doesn't act at all in book 6 like he did in book 1. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you mentioned, I think I was narrating book 3, and you like immediately, I don't think you even got all the way through the book when you sent me a message that says, hey, Belial's voice changed when he, shapeshifted to be a homeless guy. Well, the reason behind that is because when you initially sent me the book, I didn't realize what I was, what all we were doing. and how many, you know, and so I had to go back and read about Belial. And so like you, as I learn about the evolution of the characters, it helps me to voice them in a way that makes sense in that universe too. And so, you know, you're talking about getting back into like the metaverse stuff, as all of these stories, there's so many characters and so many stories that could just go on and on and on, you know.
Yeah.
And so to me, I try and keep all of that straight so that if there's new stories, if there's new short stories, which I'm sure there will be behind all of these different characters, I want them to have an entire personality, a persona that, you know, that goes along with them. And I want it to fit whatever stage of their life they are. Like when Smoke was a little kid, you know, Smoke is one person as a little kid. He's a different person when he's 200 years old, you know?
And
So I
when he's
love the
young
evolution.
Brave, right, in the short story.